Greetings, cringers, blood tingers, and copyright infringers. So I got a request a while back to go over some beginner/intermediate tips that might help out newer players that are just now trying to get into Bloodborne after almost 5 years. A few of you requested this, actually, which kinda surprised me, because I wasn't completely sure if this player base was still active, but it looks like you guys are really beginning to prove me wrong on that. Bloodborne has remained one of my favorite games of this decade, and I've probably spent more time with Bloodborne than I have any other Soulsborne game to date. I'm only half decent at the game. You aren't going to see me laying waste to a PvP arena or anything like that, but I have been playing for a pretty long time. So I figured I would try and offer some lesser-known advice and a few obscure tips that not everyone learns about Bloodborne right away. So if you're a new junta, as the kids say, hopefully a couple of these will help you out. I have went out of my way to not include clips of some of the more important bosses in the Bloodborne universe, but bear in mind, some of these tips do involve how to survive against certain bosses in the game. So please note that this video's footage may still contain minor gameplay spoilers and probably won't be completely spoiler-free, so please watch at your own risk. If you feel like dogs are overwhelming you, shoot them! I should probably elaborate a bit more, because that sounds a little concerning. So one of the reasons you all see me playing with Bloodtinge builds so often is because I absolutely hate dogs in this game. In all my years of playing this game, the single most annoying enemy in Yharnam has consistently been the dogs for me. Blood damage from guns are scripted to knock down dogs when they're inflicted. This can give you some valuable breathing room if you're being attacked by multiple dogs, which happens quite often in Bloodborne. There aren't that many instances where you're attacked by only a single dog. It's usually either two of them or more. Especially the cages in the Forbidden Woods, for example, that activate as you step close to this gate right here. It's kind of a beginner's trap, but if you can apply blood damage from either a firearm or a blood-fused weapon, even 3 or 4 dogs at a time can start becoming really manageable if you know this. The Chikage's transformed mode, for example, also does blood damage and knocks down dogs as well. Did you know that a +6 and a +9 weapon actually deal the same exact amount of visceral damage? And it took me so long to figure this out because I was so used to thinking that the upgrades you apply to your weapon with bloodstones would scale with your visceral attack damage, and this actually isn't true. Staggering an enemy with a fully charged R2, even barehanded, will allow you to execute a visceral attack on an enemy, and the damage numbers from that attack will be the exact same as when you visceral with a fully upgraded weapon, for instance. The damage your visceral attacks do will scale with strength and skill stats, not the effectiveness of a weapon that you're using. And this isn't extremely important knowledge to have, but I did find this tip kinda useful when I was on a longer journey where sometimes my weapon would become at risk of breaking and thusly unable to deal its maximum potential damage. The strength of your visceral attack, no matter how damaged your weapon is, will not be affected simply because the damage you deal with the visceral does not scale with your weapons. And here's one that actually helped me out quite a bit. Against faster enemies, attack a few times to bait them into attacking you. Parry immediately after you attack, and you're likely going to catch the enemy in the middle of their own windup. This works really great on some of the wolves, like in the Upper Cathedral Ward area, or a lot of the beasts in Old Yharnam. Enemies that attack immediately after you attack are leaving themselves open to a parry after your combo finishes, which is also why I think the Reiter Palash, check my pronunciation on that, is one of the most underrated weapons in the game, because you can attack a few times in its thrusting mode to try and bait the enemy into an attack, and then immediately use L1 for a quick gunshot that will 90% of the time catch a faster enemy in the middle of an attack. Take advantage of using transform attacks, or the L1 button, in between combos and after dodging. Transform attacks allow the player to access some really strong attacks, and only at a minimal expense of your stamina as well. It's a really powerful tactic against stronger enemies and sometimes other hunters as well. This is especially true for serrated weapons like the cleaver and spear, and if you're a strength aficionado, well, weapons like the whirligig saw and the holy blade also have really powerful transform attacks. Definitely don't sleep on this one. I figured out the usefulness of the L1 button, and I've never played the game the same way since. This next tip is one that I think we all could benefit from. Familiarize yourself with where upgrade materials are in the game. You can go to Canehurst for lots of fixed bloodstone chunks, and if you know where to go, you can access all of these bloodstone chunks before even needing to fight Rom. And if you're a new player, then I highly advise you to do that, because you are for sure going to need all the upgrades you can get your hands on. You can also get 5 fixed chunks in the Hunter's Nightmare area without fighting the area boss immediately after killing Vicar Amelia. If you'd like some more exact and precise details on where those materials are, I've went on ahead and linked a page directly to the wiki in a pinned comment below this video. I suggest you visit it, and feel free to scope out the place for some easy upgrades. This is a highly underrated function in my opinion, and it was actually a function I discovered by complete accident, actually during my very first playthrough of the game. So if you press the up arrow on the directional pad, you can actually forego some of your current health in exchange for 5 extra Quicksilver bullets, which, if you're a blood tinge whore like myself, you will find extremely useful. I don't quite remember what led to this thought process, but I remember using the up arrow button to try and heal, I guess? And I instead gave myself 5 extra bullets and almost ended up killing myself in the process. This is honestly a game-changing ability for blood tinge builds especially, or if parrying is just a large part of your playstyle, which it totally should be, by the way. Before investing into a stat past 25, consider if it wouldn't get better use actually going somewhere else. A soft cap begins at 25, so upgrading health, for instance, from 16 to 17 will get you twice the value of upgrading from, let's say, 26 to 27. If all my stats were at 25 except my skill, let's say, was at 23, then chances are I would get much more bang for my buck, so to speak, if I invested in a skill upgrade instead of upgrading my health or my stamina. Now, of course, use your own judgment on this, and honestly, just don't think too much about it, because I know how easy it is to get lost in thought for 5 minutes at a time just trying to decide what exactly you need to upgrade at the exact moment in the game. The soft cap beginning at 25 was just something I learned pretty late on, and I feel like it would benefit a lot of other players if they know that as well. At the end of the day, of course, it's always best to just not overthink it. If you're having trouble adapting to the parry windows in Bloodborne, practice on slower enemies first. Enemies with really large and prolonged windups to their attacks, like these ogres, for example. The idea for parrying in Bloodborne is to shoot after the buildup of an attack and before the attack actually lands. The parrying window is a tad more lenient in Bloodborne, I would say, than most Soulsborne games, but if you're a Souls veteran coming fresh out of the parry mechanics of a Souls game, the timing window can be a little weird to adapt to. So just find a slow as hell dude like an ogre or something and just sink in a little bit of time, familiarizing yourself with how the game expects you to parry. Also, backstabs require a fully charged R2 to go through, and you'd be surprised how many players, especially Souls veterans, tend to forget that. If an enemy or a boss is fast, be fast with them. Bloodborne encourages these frenetic slap fighting sort of battles with your weapons over more careful and methodical approaches like in Souls. I would say to fight aggression with more aggression, but I don't really think aggression is the right word to use here, because spam attacking a boss that's 5 times bigger than you will almost certainly get you killed. When I say fighting aggressively, what I kind of mean is fighting proactively. You should always be doing something, even if it's taking some time to buff your weapon with fire paper or just strafing around waiting for your stamina to come back. You should always be either attacking, dodging, or moving around to try and get into a better position. Standing still is definitely not something you want to do in this game. The enemies just get far too aggressive for that sort of wait around playstyle. Passivity will get you killed more often than not. And that's precisely why I think this next tip here is so useful. Dodging in the opposite direction of an enemy attack is actually lessening the time in which an enemy's attack hitbox overlaps you, which means a much better chance to successfully dodge. It sounds kinda stupid and pointless at first, but pay attention to what hand the enemy is holding their weapon with. If you're up against this enemy, for instance, and you observe that he has a saw blade in his left hand, then make a mental note that chances are the attack is going to be coming from his left side. And in order to counter that, you're going to want to be dodging frontwards and to your right to have the best chance of evading the attack. I know it's usually a player's knee-jerk reaction to kind of dodge backwards, especially if they believe the enemy is prepping themselves for a combo attack, but dodging forwards and into an enemy's attack usually puts you directly behind them, which gives you an immediate advantage. If an enemy is very slow, immediately start charging an R2 right after the dodge, and you'll probably get a good backstab on them. Sometimes they move out of the way just in time to avoid it, but most of the time they won't. This one is a more specific tip for specific playstyles. Only invest into one physical combat stat and try not to spread yourself too thin, because otherwise you're going to miss out on the benefits of having a really dedicated build very early on. By physical combat stat, I mean don't allocate your experience into both strength and skill interchangeably. In Bloodborne, you're going to come to learn that a jack of all trades is a master of none, basically. Having both your strength and your skill at the same level is basically going to mean you'll pretty much get to use every weapon, sure, but you'll be using none to their fullest potential. Every weapon will begin to feel the same after a while, and your overall gameplay experience will become really stale and pared down as a result. Something I like to do is make 2 character files just right off the bat and grind towards a skill build in one while making the other profile specifically based around strength. If you're having trouble with a boss, spend some time just dodging around them so that you better know an enemy's tactics. Whether or not you're gonna enjoy fighting against bosses in Bloodborne really just comes down to outlasting your adversaries. Not trying to get in these high DPS insane attacks, but instead knowing how to dodge around them and knowing what each boss is vulnerable to. In the past, I've addressed Bloodborne as the Witcher of Soulsborne games, and I think that's a pretty apt description. If you take the time to do this, the gameplay will definitely reward you for it. I have seen this way too many times in, frankly, any player that's picked up a Souls game for the first time. But please, guys, spend your shit, okay? Buy supplies, upgrade your character, get blood vials. And then when you're in the heat of battle, don't forget to actually use those supplies, even if you think you don't need them. I do not give a shit how good you think you are at a certain part of the game. If you leave the Hunter's Dream with enough echoes for several upgrades, and then you end up dying and losing them all, you really have only yourself to blame. It's never a good idea to leave the Hunter's Dream with enough echoes to fully upgrade your Hunter even once. I generally think it's just a bad move to leave the Hunter's Dream area with any echoes at all. You should always be spending your echoes on something, even if it's mundane supplies. If you don't feel like you've made a smart choice in how you've invested the echoes, well, that's kind of the great part about Bloodborne. Cut down a few wolves around Yharnam and you'll have them back in no time. What's important is none of your blood echoes go completely to waste. Farming blood gems to a lot of players can be seen as kind of a hassle and a bit of a necessary evil, but I for one think this is where the Chalice dungeons actually kind of come in handy. Grind a full Chalice dungeon from top to bottom and I promise you will be swimming in blood gems. It's also good to familiarize yourself with the item drops that each enemy has. The Winter Lanterns in the fishing hamlet area in the DLC, those scary nightmare-inducing brain-looking motherfuckers with all the eyes on their face. These enemies drop cursed gems that can sometimes boost your attack power by as much as 20%. There's also an 18% physical attack gem in Yahar Ghul just before the area's boss fight. You go across this bridge and then you descend the spiral of staircases and you find a werewolf. You'll figure it out when you get there. Don't worry about it. There are also special gems that increase the effectiveness of specific attacks, like thrust or blunt attacks, your blood damage, which are really great on firearms, and also fire, bolt, and arcane damage. Don't be afraid to play around with these gems once you've collected a few. And lastly, I know this may sound sort of tough or harsh, especially to newer players. I'm certainly not telling you to not get mad at a video game, as such advice would be very hypocritical of me to offer, but bear this in mind. Calling a certain attack or move cancer or bullshit isn't going to stop you from dying to it. Just because something was, quote, bullshit, doesn't mean the game is going to magically resurrect you from the dead. You aren't playing Sekiro, okay? You're playing Bloodborne. There are no resurrections here. 98% of the time, you are going to die because of a mistake that you yourself made. And I want to remind you that you bought this game to be challenged, and part of being challenged is being able to accept your faults and swallow the pill that sometimes you need to just take some more time and just kind of learn the enemy a little more. Bloodborne, as well as any Souls game, is about learning how your enemies will approach you and respectively how to endure and overcome your opposition. Not every single encounter you have in Bloodborne is going to require the same exact approach, so try something different. Learn from your mistakes a little and just kind of play with a little discipline. In the end, the game will thank you for it, I promise. I've probably got many more tips I could come up with here, but this video is already getting pretty long. So I'm going to call on some other veteran hunters to leave their own input in the comments section regarding any tips or general advice or even some obscure tricks that you may have picked up during your playtime. Thanks for tuning into The Forge. I'm Rusty. Please don't hoard your blood echoes, and I will see you next time. Peace.